In today's topic, I will be covering the signs and symptoms of the cerebellar disorders. Here is a picture showing a cerebellar ataxia. The girl or a child is walking, and you can just watch how that child is walking from this point to this point. Before I start the discussion, I just recap. This is the cerebellum here, and this cerebellum has a lateral part, the intermediate part, the central part, and the flocculonodular lobe. The lateral part is connected to the cerebrum. This is known as the cerebrocerebellum, and it has a dentate nucleus. And this lateral part is involved in the motor planning in association with the premotor area to the motor cortex. Also, it will be in association with the basal ganglia. In this is going through the dentate gyrus. Then we have a second part. This is a Spino Cerebellum. This Spino Cerebellum is the intermediate paravermis part. This is a vermis part, that is central one. The paravermis part, the intermediate zone, that is governs the lateral or the distal muscles. And they have a nucleus known as interpositus nucleus, and this interpositus nucleus gives information to the distal muscles and performs the muscle contractions or movement or action. Then we have the central portion, the vermis. It has a vestigial nuclei or vestigial nucleus on one side, if you take, and this vestigial nucleus communicates with the axial group of muscles that is maintaining for the posture, the gravity, and those type of features. So this is in brief about these things, and this is a flocculonodular lobe. It does not have a distinct nuclei here, but it utilizes the vestibular nuclei. For your information, the vestibular nuclei from the otolith organs and the semicircular canals in the medulla, there are four pairs of nuclei: the superior, inferior, lateral, and medial. Just a brief outline about that. And this vestibular nuclei is concerned with the balance, equilibrium, and the ocular movement. That is the eyeball movement. So this is in brief about the functional parts, the nuclei, the connections, and the broad functions. Broad functions I had given here: the motor planning, motor execution, the balance, and ocular motion. With this brief outline, we move on to the basic neuronal circuitry of the cerebellum in terms of the functions. We have the Purkinje cells. This is a Purkinje cell here on this panel and on this panel, with a very extensive dendritic arborizations, and this is where it is shown. And the axon of the Purkinje cell is given to the deep cerebellar nuclei, and deep cerebellar nuclei is the output is going through the deep cerebellar nuclei to the various parts where they are assigned. Then second, very abundant cells in the cerebellum are the granular cells. This is a granular cell here, and the peculiarity of these granular cells, they have a T type of axons, and they make the parallel fibers. And these parallel fibers cut these dendritic arborizations of the Purkinje cells, and that is the peculiarity of the granular cell. The output of the Purkinje cell is inhibitory, the output of the granular cell is excitatory. Now, the Purkinje cell in turn are getting inhibitory influences from the basket cells and the stellate cells, and this type of inhibition is a feed forward inhibition, because basket cells and stellate cells are also excited by the parallel fibers. The granule cell in turn are modulated by the Golgi cell activity. That means they will check the granular cell activity is checked by the Golgi cell. So now we have these layers of there are three cortical layers in the cerebellum: the molecular layer, the Purkinje layer, granular layer. Molecular layer is dendrite of Purkinje cell. The Purkinje is the cell bodies of the Purkinje cell. Granular layer is the granular cells, the layer of granular cells. So this point is represented here schematically. So then this one major circuit is the Purkinje cells receive indirect input from the mossy fibers. When an action begins, the mossy fiber sends impulses to the deep cerebellar nuclei, and deep cerebellar nuclei sends excitatory outputs to the various parts. At the same time, this mossy fiber make a synaptic contact with the granular cells, and these granular cells provide the parallel fibers. They will excite these dendritic arborizations of the Purkinje cells, and that Purkinje cell in turn inhibit the deep cerebellar activity. This begins here, it begins, and here it stops. So there is no overshoot. That is a dampening circuit. So now sometimes this, if it does not happen, there is another fiber coming from the inferior olivary nucleus that is known as a climbing fiber. First, it will excite the deep cerebellar nucleus. Then it has a exclusive connections with the Purkinje cell. Exclusive connections with the Purkinje cells, you can see that, and that would excite the Purkinje cells, and the excitement is strong enough, it suddenly stops the action of the whatever the output going from the deep cerebellar nucleus. This is for the corrective measures. This is about the basic functional circuitry of the cerebellum. Moving on, I have already mentioned on 2 or 3 occasions about the functions of the cerebellum. Now again, it is the coordination of the movement. The coordination of the movements, that means the movements are planned, especially the planned here. The planning is in terms of the sequence, the timing, and the association of other things. This is the cerebral component. It is performed by the cerebrocerebellum, the coordination of the movement. Every movement has to be, that is the contraction of the muscle should come one after another as a matter of sequence. Similarly, the second part, as a continuation of the coordination, it is the sequencing and the scheduling of the movements. Suppose if I were to move this thing, you can see that if I were to move this thing to touch my nose, so you can just see that move this thing from this point to touch my nose. So this one would be a sort of, it is not happening in a smooth manner. It is scheduling, that means in a stepwise manner. At each step, it reaches to the point. So that the sequencing and scheduling of the movements, how they are going to happen. Then at the same time, when I reach the nose here, you can see the nose here, and suddenly in case of a cerebellum, what it makes it perfect to reach the target site. Suppose if the cerebellum is damaged, so this target site is overshooting, and this one is by the servo control mechanism, that is the feedback correction provided by the Spino Cerebellum. This is especially because this is the movement of the distal muscle. This is a distal muscle there, and this is because of that it is the Spino Cerebellum, interior part of the cerebellum. Then the smoothing of movement and turning off and on the movement. Smoothing of the movements, I was just checking, I just reach there, put the finger there, you see the finger, and then I reach back. Very smooth, very smooth. Our actions are very smooth. Whenever I am writing, I just keep doing everything. All our actions are smooth. There is no what happens overshoot or undershoot. So now this one, at the same time, sometimes what happens, we have to perform the actions. Say for example, I am just trying to make the claps one after another, the claps like this, and this repetition of the movements, or even the supination of the movements, this is though it appears very simple for all of us when we are at health. So now, even doing this thing, see, look at that. So many things structures are involved, and to do these things, you need to have the coordination and other sequencing. They are happening. It will not happen so smooth, and he may not be able to perform, or if he performs in a very bad. That means if I were to make it like that, I will just make it. See, look at that aspect. So that type of that is another turning off and on of the repetitive actions. The repetitive actions are this, or in anything. You can take up the lower limbs or any of those things. Those actions are governed by the cerebellum. That's a part of the. Then the muscle tone. We have the muscle tone, and this muscle tone, the alpha, gamma, are linked in the cerebellum. That is especially the spinal part of the cerebellum. Both the intermediate part and the vestigial part, the vermis part, they participate in the muscle tone. That's another part. The intermediate part and the vestigial part, they participate in the muscle tone, because for any muscle action, muscle tone is a basic requirement. That is alpha gamma linkage. The posture and equilibrium. The posture and equilibrium are the component of the central part of the cerebellum. This is central part of the cerebellum. Plus, this requires the assistance from the vestibular flocculonodular lobe, vestibular cerebellum, and even the vestibular system. So posture and equilibrium, that's another function. The eyeball movement, the eyeballs, because we have to direct our actions, and even our eyeballs are also directed for the action. This eyeball movement, this is called a vestibulo-ocular reflex. The vestibular-ocular reflex, because it starts at the vestibular nucleus and then goes to the colliculus, and from the colliculus it goes to the third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerve nucleus and moves the eyeballs. So that part is a vestibulo-ocular reflex. It is for the eyeball movement. This again involves the spinal and vestibular system. Then another aspect, the motor learning, cognitive functions, because there are so many things. So then we start performing an action. It was so difficult. Now, because of the repetitive involvement, or repetitively you are performing this action, so that becomes, it eases out. So that is the learning or the plasticity, and also the cognitive functions. That means how best you can achieve that particular target. So that is the cognitive part of the learning. All those things are involving both the cerebral circuits as well as the spinal circuits. Because when we start performing an action, we tend to use more than required muscles, even the postures. And now during the cognitive learning or learning process, we understand that some of the motions which we were doing were unnecessary, we eliminate them. That's the learning aspect. So the motor learning, especially in terms of the precision, in terms of the optimization of the muscle activity, that is what is happening in the cerebral. This is cerebral part and the spinal part. Then anticipatory component number 9. This is an anticipatory component performing a precise ballistic actions. Precise ballistic actions. A keyboard, mobile, computer tapping, piano playing, and even your mridangam or a tabla. If you happen, I don't know how many of you have enjoyed the solo tabla performance by Ustad Zakir Hussain. So he does it so wonderfully, and these moments, as you just see that the moments of his fingers on those two instruments. So he does it precisely and produce the notes as required for a particular instance. So those are all ballistic motions. Ballistic motions, and those is the part of the cerebellum. If the cerebellum is not there, you will not be able to do the ballistic motions like that. You may not be able to operate your mobile phone. This is the basic requirement of a present day. Okay, so the functions of the cerebellum, I repeat: coordination, sequencing and scheduling, the feedback correction, smoothing and turning off and on the repetitive actions, then maintenance of muscle tone, maintenance of posture and equilibrium, eyeball movement, the cognitive part of the motor learning, so that is the ability to make the motor act precise and easy, and ballistic actions. My next question is, what happens if cerebellum is not there, or is removed, or is deceased? What happens to the person, whether he survives or do not survive? That is my first question. Person will survive. So person will not die, person will survive. However, there will be a severe deficiencies which will affect his quality of life. Though he is surviving, life becomes a burden to the individual. Now, because he is unable to perform routine actions for a living smoothly. I just give you one simple example. Eating food, taking it from the plate, putting it in the mouth. If we are going back to the functions of the cerebellum, that means it is starting from this point and this point, that smooth running, it is not happening. You cannot take the food, forget about the fork, chopstick or a spoon, even by hand, you cannot reach to the mouth and put it in your mouth. And it will come here and there and drop. So all those smoothness, that means you will not be able to eat properly. And at the same time, you will not be able to perform other routine activities which are essential for our survival. So that means unable to perform the routine actions for living smoothly. That is what happens when the cerebellum deceased. Now, what are the signs and symptoms of the cerebellar disorders? Here, what I have done I have arranged these disorders in alphabetical order. Ataxia, atonia, didachokinasia, 3 A's. The next one, dysmetria, decomposition, disorder. dysarthria, A3, D3. Then comes the intense and tremor, incoordination. Then comes the nystagmus. Nystagmus is a jerky eyeball movement. Then comes past pointing, the pendular reflexes, rebound phenomena. I will just add here the posture and equilibrium and the rebound phenomena, that is overshoot. So these are some of the signs and symptoms of the cerebellar disorders. So okay, let us see one, the motor incoordination. The motor incoordination, before we understand what is going to the incoordination, let us understand what is coordination. Coordination is a combination of movements, especially the movements of the various muscles and the joints and the segments of the motor activity, with a spatial direction. Spatial means suppose I want to move this hand to this, from here to here. It's a spatial direction. Direction is from here to here is the direction. Okay. So now I have to move it, and you have asked me to do it quick. So then what I do is I will do it the fast. That is the force of action. So that means it has a kinematic and a kinetic components. One, it has a direction and a force. So rather simple words are the spatial direction and the force of action. These are the two components, and these two components are called as a kinematic and a kinetic components. That is what the motor coordination. The motor coordination starts with the planning of actions. The planning of actions here in the premotor cortex and the motor cortex. And in this planning of action, the sequences and the timing and execution of all the actions are being present. Now, this sequencing, timing, and the plan of entire action is sent to the motor neurons in the spinal cord and then to the muscles via this corticospinal tract. So that will produce the sequential execution of various actions by the muscles. Now, if you are looking at this diagram, yesterday I was trying to explain about these things. This one, the carbon copy is sent here to the interior part of the cerebellum, and the effervescence, that means the receipt or acknowledgement of the information of the carbon copy at the motor neuron level in the spinal cord is sent back to the cerebellum through the spinocerebellar tract, and then whatever the executed plan is provided by the proprioceptors through the dorsal spinocerebellar tract to the cerebellum, intermediate lobe of the cerebellum. Here, what I mentioned, motor coordination is achieved by one, planning of action in the cortex and in the lateral cerebellum, and the sequential execution of the parts that is happening in the muscles, and the smooth transition between the relay. So that means from this part to this part, there should be a smooth transition, and finally performing exactly. Now, this involves, as I have suggested, the premotor cortex, the spinal part of cerebellum. This is spinal part of cerebellum. The brainstem. This is a brainstem here. The red nucleus, the inferior olivary nucleus, the pontine reticular system, and then the spinal cord. Now, the proprioceptive inputs from muscles and joints during motion, they also provide information. All these things are put together, brings about coordination. If something goes wrong somewhere, then the coordination is not there. So that is incoordination. Damage to these parts or its connections results in impairment, and that is known as incoordination, and that is ataxia. Ataxia is a generalized term. It may not refer exactly to the gait, but we always think about a gait. But ataxia is a motor incoordination. Now, this circuitry becomes important for the ataxia. Now, let us see what is that ataxia is. It is the loss of control over bodily movements. They are not happening the way they are expected to happen. They are not coordinated. They are not coming in the sequence. They are not having that spatial and the force dynamics. So, loss of control. So these, especially, what are these bodily actions? Walking, talking, eating, looking, doing any action, all these things affected. One of those things is a gait, that is walking. There is what is called a Ataxic gait. It is usually reeling, wide-based gait, or a drunken gait. Drunken gait. And it's not as simple as that. He is not able to balance. Suppose when you are examining a cerebellar patient, and you have to be supportive. He may fall down anytime and get himself injured. So he has a great inability to maintain the balance and equilibrium. And his walk is not steady, and he may stumble and he may fall down. Then ataxia is a poor coordination of muscles, difficulty with the fine tasks, especially fine distal muscles, the fine things. Say, for example, you ask the individual to use the spoon, fork, or a chopstick. Whatever that precise movement is missing with a poor coordination. This happens because of the finger movement. Writing whatever the text material, so that also is also a part of the coordination, and that is affected. And you look back, buttoning a shirt, tying a shoelace, or doing small activities like that, these things, threading a needle. So how hard it is, even with everything, with all the things, we will not be able to. But the tailor does it effectively, and he does it wonderfully. But as a beginner, I may not be able to thread a needle in this needle opening. So that those are the very fine movements and that will not be possible in ataxic individuals. In addition, we have the vocal cord movements. The vocal cord movements, the talking or the voice production, is a very, very specific and precise action. And this precise action is because of the sequential contraction of the vocal cord muscles to produce a resonance or vibration in such a way that it produces a speech which we understand. And that is affected, and it would be a scanning or a staccato like this thing. This is also a part of the incoordination or ataxia. So there will be the eyeball movements are involuntary, and there may be jerky movements. They are also part of that. And in addition, the swallowing is a initial part of the swallowing is a voluntary act. That means taking the bolus, the food bolus, and putting it into the pharynx and then to the larynx. To propel into the larynx, it requires a force to be generated, a sequence or series of muscles to be contracting. So that's also not happening. So these are the effects of ataxia. I have discussed about this Romberg sign when I talked about the posterior column sensations. The posterior column sensations, they send these proprioceptive inputs. The proprioceptive inputs reaching there either the lemniscal component of the proprioceptive inputs or non-lemniscal components or spinocerebellar components, they are missing. And when they are missing, we feel that there is ataxia or incoordination. When a person stands, and keep his feet together and closes his eyes, he may fall down because sensory information going from the foot are missing. Even this person, when he wants to walk because he does not feel the information. There will be a what is called a stamping gait. Okay, leave aside that. This is a test performed for sensory ataxia. Anyway, when Romberg sign is positive, so that indicates a sensory ataxia. This is a test for the evaluation of the posterior column sensations. The person is asked to stand with the closed eyes, with feet held together. The posterior column, as I have already mentioned, it carries conscious and unconscious proprioceptive sensations. Hence, because they are absent, he will sway on either side and even he may fall. Inability to balance is due to the absence of the proprioceptive inputs from the spinal cord to reach cerebellum and higher centers. Okay, now the cerebellum is normal in this situation. In this situation, the problem is with the posterior column, that is the sensations going up, the fibers reaching the cerebellum. It's not the cerebellum per se. This is called a sensory ataxia. Now, okay, if I take it in the other way around, this is normal. If the sensations carried by the spinal cord are okay, whatever these posterior column sensations, if the cerebellum is damaged, so in that case, that is called motor ataxia. Motor ataxia means it is the failure of the cerebellum to perform or to coordinate. So this results in a cerebellar lesions where person is not able to balance even when eyes are open. In sensory ataxia, person is not able to balance when eyes are closed. When eyes are open, he is able to balance because he sees everything, he tries to adjust. Here, even when eyes are open, because it is because of the cerebellum that is the defect is. That is a Romberg sign. So here, a Romberg sign negative means you have to rule out motor ataxia. Then you have to look for cerebellar signs. That is why I have brought the Romberg sign here. Now, another important sign of a cerebellar disease is atonia. What is muscle tone? Muscle tone is a composite of the activity of the intrafusal fibers and extrafusal fibers. These intrafusal fibers are the muscle spindles. They are constantly under the influence of the gamma motor neuron activity. This gamma motor neuron activity in turn produces or stretches the muscle spindle and increases the nerve activity arising from that. That is group 1A. And group 1A make a synaptic contact with the alpha motor neurons, and these alpha motor neurons remain in a partial state. The muscle tone is a partial state of contraction of a skeletal muscle. And for that reason, when we passively want to stretch the muscle, they offer the resistance. This resistance, we consider it as a tone. It is because of the partial state of the contraction. This partial state of the contraction is because of the gamma alpha loop through this 1A. Now, this gamma motor neuron activity, if you are looking at this particular picture here, this is the brain. We have a number of centers. This 5 is the pontine, the mesenchymal and mesenchymopontine reticular system, descending reticular system. This is facilitatory, the plus plus. You just see that plus plus. And number 4 is the medullary inhibitory center. These two things are projecting onto the gamma motor neuron here. I have just brought these two things. This medullary reticulospinal tract, this medullary reticulospinal tract is inhibitory. It is sending inhibitory information to the gamma motor neuron activity. And this pontine and mesenchymal reticular system sends excitatory outputs. You can just see that excitatory output. This is the pontine and this mesenchymal. This is excitatory. This is inhibitory. This is what I have written. This is on the gamma motor. This is on the gamma motor neuron activity. What I have shown here, number 6, is a vestibular system and a part of the flocculonodular lobe. So this vestibular system has excitatory activity on the alpha motor neuron activity. Now let us see what happens, what the cerebellum does. This is cerebellum. You just see that. This is the anterior part of the cerebellum. This is posterior part of the cerebellum. And this anterior part of the cerebellum and the posterior part of the cerebellum and even the central cerebellum. You just see that, the central cerebellum. So these all things will have an inhibitory input to number 4. That's what I have written. Anterior, posterior cerebellar input, inhibitory to the medullary descending inhibitory reticular projections. So that means anterior and posterior cerebellum. So they will send inhibitory input to the medullary reticular system, area 4. The second part, the vestigial part, this vestigial part has a facilitatory effect. You can just see that number 6 and the central, they have a facilitatory effect. So this is what the pontoreticular system, they are facilitatory to this thing. Pontoreticular, these things is suppressed. So then muscle tone decreases. So thus there is a atonia. Pollock's experiments were that they produced the ischemic decerebration, in which they occluded the 2 basilar arteries and the internal carotid artery. When they did that, so they just the anterior part of the cerebellum was totally necrosed. They found the rigidity, but the rigidity was alpha motor neuron rigidity. So they took this experiment further. So they said that the anterior part of the cerebellum is the part where alpha and gamma motor neurons are coordinated. So that means they have took the normal cats, anesthetized them, and they recorded the activity, especially the alpha motor neuron activity and the gamma motor neuron activity. When they cool down the anterior part of the cerebellum, the gamma motor neuron activity decreased, but alpha motor neuron activity increased. So that means they suggested there is a link of alpha, gamma and alpha in the cerebellum, especially in the anterior part of the cerebellum. Thus, because of the cutting or destruction of the cerebellum will affect the muscle tone, that is atonia, and this is due to the loss of a gamma motor neuron activity. And at the same time, there will be a decreased alpha activity, thus there is a loss of muscle tone, or atonia or hypotonia. That is the situation. I once again repeat, on 2 counts. 1, the count on the alpha diminish, count on the gamma diminish, there is a decreased muscle tone. In addition, the anterior part of the cerebellum is a thing which tries to join this. Here I have just made this particular diagram. So this would join this the alpha and gamma motor neuron activity. That is how it forms the. So that means muscle atonia is seen because of the decreased gamma and decreased alpha activity. Move on to the further. So there is another interesting feature of the cerebellar disease is the inability to perform alternating actions known as adidacokinasia or dysdidacokinasia. Adidacokinasia is absolute. Dysdidacokinasia is a relative thing or abnormal things. It is an inability to perform alternating actions of agonist and antagonist group of muscles like pronation, supination, damru, you know, that damru movement, that means this type of movements. You can have these, this is also another thing, these alternating actions. So such type of actions are lost, or they are not, they become clumsier. So now, if you are analyzing this action, there is a switching on of the agonist group of muscles, then sequencing and contraction of this agonist group of muscle. But already there is a cerebellar damage, and because of the cerebellar damage, there is a dysmetria and a decomposition of the movement. So that means this is not happening in the way it is expected to happen. Then switching off the agonist activity, then turning on the antagonist group of activity, then performing the antagonist group of muscles to do. Again, they are in a dysmetric and a decomposed situation. And such a repetition will not happen. Such a repetition will not happen. And this is the adidacokinasia or dysdidacokinasia. That is alternating actions he cannot perform. Dysmetria. It is the cerebellar disease patient may not be able to judge the scaling of the things. He cannot, suppose he is there in front of him, the wall, but he goes and hits the wall because he cannot judge the distance. Because inability to judge the distance or a scale of the action plan. Here, it is a normal thing. This is a normal thing. He can just see that, and here he will just see when he tries to move, he will not be able to judge. He hits somewhere. He hits somewhere. He hits here or here in the eyes. So this is a overshoot mechanism. Okay, there is an inability to judge the distance. So I gave the living example. That person is not able to scale down his actions. He does not exactly assess, judge the distance or the whatever the things. Thus results in a overshoot or undershoot. Either he may go and stand before the wall or hit the wall. That overshoot is hitting the wall, a stand before the wall is undershoot. So now overshoot here, this is the point where here, this overshoot is a dysmetric, this is a past pointing. This is a past pointing. It goes beyond, because he cannot stop here exactly to the nose. He cannot come and stop here exactly to the nose. He just pass behind the nose. That is called a past pointing. Dysmetria, past pointing. So then to correct that past pointing, suppose I have hit here, then he will try to bring and try to touch the nose. Say for example, first he comes here, he comes with all the ugliness, and then he touches here and there, and finally touch. So such correction is known as a intention tremor or action tremor. Intention tremor or action tremor. So that means he tries to touch it, so he will go here and there. So that means at the end of the actions, when he has to terminate the actions, he cannot reach the precise point. That is intention tremor. Now, past pointing and intention tremor are almost the same thing. It is because of the overshoot, undershoot mechanisms. Past pointing, I have already mentioned, overshooting of an action, and the inability to place the finger or some other part of the body accurately on a selected point which has been asked. In case of the cerebellar patients, you have to be careful in the sense the person may hit in the eyeball or in the eye because he does not have the judgment. Under that circumstances, some of the neurologists adopt that he should touch the chin rather than the nose, chin, so that he may the area eyes may be protected. So you may have to design such thing, or you may ask him to do certain other actions, finger to finger actions, or trying to take a pen and ask him to place the cap. So this is how I come and do. Okay, a cerebellar disorder person, and he will not be able to find this thing, and he will be just doing it abnormally. So that is the past pointing. Decomposition of the movement. Here I have taken a photograph. This is a photograph, a decomposed photograph picture by Bridge Edward in 1830. That is his 1830 to 1904. You can just see that this particular polo motion. You can just see that the polo motion. He is coming here, touching, and then coming back. So this is a decomposed photographic picture. So okay, similarly our actions are decomposed. That means decomposed in the sense our actions are fragmented, as if suppose if I were to bring this point to the nose, this does not come in one step. In our brain, this is a fragmented information. That means it has stations at each level, and when they are coming to the stations, the motion, direction, everything is speculated or anticipated. So that is how. So this is a fragmented action. Now these fragmented actions remain fragmented because of the cerebellum. These fragmented actions are not. We do not see them. We do not see them. So this is what the photographer trying to catch them. So these fragmented actions they manifest. And this is called a decomposition. That means the movements get decomposed. So they are split or broken. So this is also a part of the dysmetria. All the movements are fragmented, as happens in a robotic or a computer driven. Another thing, another interesting thing there. In the computers, if they were to perform, they will perform at a particular level and like that. So now that computer type of or robotic type of motions is he will be able to do. Smoothening of contraction and relaxation of muscles one by one, thus exhibits a fragmented actions. This is a decomposition of movement. Then dysarthria. This is called a scanning speech or a staccato speech. It is a jerky, explosive, slurred, and loud with separated syllables. Problem is with the moving from one noise to another because of the ataxic larynx. Larynx or laryngeal muscles are not coordinating They are not coordinating each other, and that is why you get this type of information. Here, speech is like that produced in old computers. The causes of the enunciation of the individual syllables. Say, for example, here I have provided the British Parliament. That is what we pronounced. Now, it becomes the person with a cerebellar diseases. He pronounces it as the British Parliament. How do you like that? So I just repeat again. The scanning or staccato is the British Parliament. So that means the whole word is broken down into number of fragments. So that is the staccato speech, scanning speech, or dysarthria. Then intention tremor. This is an accent tremor, and it is due to the oscillations of accents which are happening because of the things, because he comes here, then then comes back up. That means when he reaches the target, he comes and goes. That type of the tremors because of the oscillations. That is the tremor. Tremor or oscillations are seen when action to reach the target, as there is a overshoot and undershoot. To achieve the target, oscillatory movements are seen, because this is a part of the pendular actions, because our motions are pendular, and these pendular actions are to be dampened, are to be made precise. That is a part of the intention tremor, and that is also a part of the past pointing. Then nystagmus. Nystagmus is a rhythmic, regular movements of the eyeball. The characteristic pattern of the nystagmus distinguishes it from other nystagmus. Here I have mentioned three important causes of the nystagmus. One is the cerebellar cause. Cerebellar cause. In this cerebellar cause, the movement of the eyeball is a slow, jerky, incoordinated. Suppose even if he is trying to see, there are movements of the eyeball, slow, jerky movements, and they are not coordinated. I try to remind you optokinetic reflexes. Suppose you are traveling by a train or a moving vehicle, your car. So then what happens? You are trying to see a landscape object like a hillock or a hill or a tree or whatever the object. So then what happens? Your eyes tries to keep focus it. When focusing, the eyeballs are continuously roving around. Eyeballs are continuously moving, and suddenly they will come back to this thing. So this pursuit movements and saccadic movements. That means slow movements and the saccadic movements. That is optokinetic. Similarly, what happens? You are reading a book. When you are reading a book, you start from one point of the book and you keep moving. That is the pursuit movements. You keep moving. Suddenly, you end up the line. You come back. So that is the saccadic movement. So the pursuit movement and saccadic movement, these are optokinetic movements, because when I am reading the textbook or I am in the moving vehicle and focusing on an object in the landscape. So that is optokinetic, where visual collicular components are involved. The vestibular thing are also associated with an nystagmus. They will also produce the rolling of the eyeball. So that is associated with they are fast and smooth. The vestibular, I think they are not controllable. So now coming back, the cerebellar nystagmus is slow, jerky, incoordinated. They are not smooth. Optokinetic, associated with the visual movement. The vestibular, associated with the vestibular actions, change in the head position or the neck positions or the acceleration or any other gravitational things. But they are fast and smooth. The nystagmus or the eyeball movements can reduce the vision because of if the eyeballs are continuously moving, they will reduce the vision, and they will affect the depth perception and even the balance, posture balance and coordination. The eye movements can be paroxysmal, they come in attacks, or they may be continuous and caused by such things as changes in a gaze or head positioning. So gaze is you are trying to orient at one place, and suddenly it may change, or head movement, sudden change in the head position. That is about nystagmus. In pendular nystagmus, the speed of motion of the eyes is the same in both the direction. In jerk nystagmus, there is a slow and a fast pace. That means I have made a pendular nystagmus and a jerky nystagmus. In the jerky nystagmus, they are slow and fast pace. The eyes move slowly in one direction, then seem to jerk back in the other direction, as I am trying to tell about when you are reading a textbook or seeing a landscape in the object. Optokinetic, visual or a motion pursuit movements are followed by a saccadic movements. Pursuit movement followed by a saccadic movement. So that is about the jerk movement. And the vestibular, they beat the direction. Now coming back, the tendon reflexes. When you elicit the knee jerk, there will be a sudden change in the direction of the knee joint, and there will be a pendular actions. The swaying or swinging of the knee is happening maybe 3 to 4 times or 2 to 3 times, something like that. In case of cerebellar diseases, this happens more than 4 times. So that means that is pendular. So that means it oscillates in the directions. So that is the knee jerk. And usually it's 4 or less than 4 is considered as normal. More than 4 is abnormal. This is because of the proprioceptive inputs from the joints are not able to be checked and coordinated. So that particular schematic I had shown, that is not happening. So the ventral and dorsal spinocerebellar tracts oscillate. So that means the intended, the motor copy and the executed copy, they do not match each other. So that is why the pendular actions. As such, the motions are pendular, the second part. They will not be able to dampen this pendular actions. Then a rebound phenomena. Rebound phenomena here, he is trying to elicit that, and he is suppose you try to hold it and you ask him to flex. You ask him to flex with forcefully, and you put the resistance. Suddenly we withdraw the resistance, my hand remained at the same place. My hand remained at the same place. Say, for example, I repeat, I ask him to flex it strongly. And in a person with the cerebellar diseases, what happens? Suppose I leave this thing and he may hit the nose, he may hit the face. So this is what has happened here, and this is what has happened here in a dashed line. In dashed line, he may hit the face or the objects. This is known as a rebound phenomena, a bouncing back, because he is not able to stop, because it's a pendular motion. There is a problem to get back, and that particular signal is missing. So bouncing back of the action, when suddenly withdrawn, and it is your this part of the cerebellar disease. The summary of signs and symptoms of the cerebellar diseases: the ataxia, atonia, didachokinasia, dysmetria, decomposition of movements, dysarthria, drunken gait, intense tremor, incoordination of movements, nystagmus, past pointing, pendular tendon reflexes, rebound phenomena. This I have arranged in alphabetical order. You try to make your thing regarding the posture. I added the posture and equilibrium. There is a vertigo, posture, equilibrium. Those are also the signs of the cerebellar diseases. Okay, the reference books, the Guyton, textbook of medical physiology, the Genong's review of medical physiology. This is the Sampson Wright's applied physiology and the Kendall's neuroscience. Okay, the assignments are describe the parts and functions of cerebellum, describe the signs and symptoms of cerebellar disorders, and explain each one of them. Short notes on dysmetria, Didachokinasis, nystagmus, Atexia, intention tremor, past pointing, scanning speech. Mind you, here in nystagmus, you have to mention about the three forms of nystagmus: optokinetic, vestibular, and cerebellar. The brief answer questions are: describe various signs and symptoms of cerebellar diseases. Write briefly decomposition of movement. Then speech abnormality. Here it has not come. Then describe the deep tendon reflexes in cerebellar disorders. Describe the type of gait in cerebellar diseases. Okay. In the next class, I will continue with the posture regulating reflexes. Okay. Thank you.